Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has launched his presidential campaign this week. The 44-year-old DeSantis is presenting himself as a younger and more electable version of the former president and is gaining some interest with Republican voters. But is that really enough? He is known for making amendments to controversial bills, and many are wary of his competency. So I want to know, does DeSantis stand a chance, or can nobody stop the Trump train? Well, joining me now is Chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Hello to you, Greg. It's always a pleasure. So we've seen this week, Greg, a rather disastrous launch of his campaign. DeSantis on Twitter repeatedly crashing, Trump's people ridiculing it, and the polling is not looking particularly good for him. Trump's still on 61% versus 32%. But Team DeSantis, are they still optimistic?
Yeah, and I think they should be. And I think, one of the comments that you made was that, people are questioning his competence. I mean, I guess you could argue that, given that the Twitter launch was very clumsy, to say the least. I don't think it's a Rick Perry moment or a Mike Dukakis in the tank or John Kerry on the windsurfer that, in many ways, really ruined their chances. But I think in this case, it was a clumsy start. But I think he's in a good position. Yes, he's down 30 points, but look at where the other competitors are. They're all below 5%. So he's at this point, the only real meaningful candidate. And also, if you look at President Trump as practically an incumbent president, in the sense that, he was the sitting president only 2 years ago, to only be polling at 50 or 60, depending on the poll, that's not really sustainable. Incumbent presidents should be at 90, and you've got basically two incumbents now, in President Biden and former President Trump, both polling well below that metric. And so I don't see either one of them being really successful in the general election.
OK, Greg, Ron DeSantis, of course, I think a lot of people in Britain wish we had somebody like him. He's gone to war on woke. He's kicked out critical race theory in schools. He kept Florida largely open during lockdowns and allowed the economy to prosper. He was against mask mandates. He's taken on wokery at Disney. The trans movement. There's a lot of policies there that would land very well with fed up Americans.
Oh, I think so. I mean, look, he's crushed it on so many different metrics. And yes, COVID is probably the most famous one, but he's really crushed it on the economy. You've had massive inflows of population movement. There's really been a mass exodus out of blue states into Florida and other red states, but notably Florida is leading the pack. So, yeah, on any number of metrics or measurements, he's really doing well. So I think he'll really rank, not just in terms of his views, which are very similar in some way, or very similar to President Trump's, but also on his ability to execute and his willingness to fight back, which again is similar to President Trump. But I think DeSantis has a really well-defined record of success in Florida of actually accomplishing the goals that he mentions, that he dictates. And that was, quite obvious in his almost 20-point victory in his reelection last November. So he's really got a ton of political momentum right now, Martin.
Yeah, but the point I would like to put to you, Greg, if they ostensibly are the same kind of politician, you couldn't put a cigarette paper between their policies. But of course, Trump has a much, much bigger brand reputation. He's got much more awareness. But could that be a negative? Is the same person without that baggage the preferred choice of Republicans like yourself?
Well, there might be. I mean, look, I think the Governor DeSantis has to do a good job in the next few months of differentiating himself. And, you're absolutely right, Martin. They're very similar in many ways, but there are some differences. And I think, the reaction and the management of COVID and lockdowns and vaccine mandates is one differentiator. I think that President Trump stuck with Anthony Fauci for way too long for a guy who likes to fire people. He stuck with Fauci. I think Governor DeSantis can run with that. So there's a few areas where I think they can, he can highlight some differences. And again, the youth, he's 45, he'll be 45 years old on election day, I believe. He's got an unbelievable track record, and he can serve 2 terms. He doesn't have some of the baggage that President Trump has. So these are things that DeSantis will have to highlight in an effort to differentiate himself. And I think the obvious is as I said, everyone else is polling at 5 or lower. And it's really, at this point, a two-man race. And that's probably a testament to both candidates.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating, Greg, in the same poll we mentioned earlier, is if you put Trump or DeSantis in a presidential poll against Joe Biden, DeSantis actually comes out ahead. He gets 47 points versus Trump getting 46. So if it came down to the big head-to-head between either DeSantis and Trump versus Joe Biden, the American public seems to be favouring DeSantis. So if it is that brutal head-to-head in the primaries, DeSantis, it seems, is more popular if he gets through to the final two.
Absolutely. And I think, you have to look at electability. It shouldn't be the only thing. You still have to win, and you still have to demonstrate that you have conservative principles, but that you're willing to execute. And he's done a good job of that in Florida. And keep in mind that, the rest of the country doesn't really know him yet. So I think as he spreads, he campaigns around the country. He's doing very well in Iowa and South Carolina and New Hampshire, which are the early voting states. And so I think, the momentum is going to change. And remember, he was only less than 10 points below Trump in the polling before the Alvin Bragg indictment. And Alvin Bragg really helped Trump. The Democrats and the corporate media that are supporting the Democrats, which is most of it in America, they really want Trump to be the candidate. And so they're doing everything they can to basically damage DeSantis right now, both, because they're afraid of DeSantis. I think that's, safe to say. And so you'll see a lot of pressure on DeSantis. Nobody's picking on the other candidates. Even Trump himself is basically ignoring the other candidates. So I think it really shows that both Trump and the Democrats are worried about Ron DeSantis.
One thing we can guarantee, of course, Greg, is it will not be without a dull moment. He already calls him Ron DeSanctimonious. I'm not sure it's his best nickname, but it's quite funny. And there was a fantastic thing this week from Carrie Lake, who said, because DeSantis, of course, has taken Disney to court, but he isn't quite winning. They're digging in. And she said, if you can't beat Donald Duck, then you cannot ever beat Donald Trump. It will not be boring, will it? But from the party's point of view, from the Republicans' point of view, after the way Biden has ran the country, particularly with the porous borders, on net zero policies, clamping down on energy production from within America, the food inflation, do you think you've got a real chance of the red corner winning the next presidential election?
Without a doubt, Martin. I mean, all the metrics are so horrible for Biden. He's polling at 40 and lower. Kamala Harris polls even lower than Biden. There is every reason to believe that, my dog could win this election against Biden and the Democrats. So, I'm not. And DeSantis has shown not only that he can win, and again, he won by 20 points after winning in 2018 in a very purple state, very much a swing state. But he's turned Florida into a solidly red state. He brought along the rest of the ticket in 2022. So now the entire delegation in the state, in Tallahassee, is Republican right now, and picked up a few congressional seats as well. So I think, he's got a really good argument to make that he would be the most likely candidate to beat Biden. But I think any of these candidates would beat Biden in 2024, without a doubt.
Well, thank you for joining us, Greg Swenson from Nantucket, Massachusetts. It's always a pleasure. Let's move on now. I'm obsessed with American politics.